Hello, it's Davy Mooney coming to you from the University of North Texas, where I run the jazz guitar program. Benedetto artist, Sunnyside Records, got the discography up here, got Way Back, and the rest. Mel Bay books, Into the Labyrinth, Personalizing Jazz Vocabulary. And yeah, it's mid-April 2024, spring. And I just got done teaching my improv class. It's kind of got my professor garb on. And this jacket is it's kind of like Mr. Rogers. You know, I walk through this door in this office and I change whatever coat I was wearing outside, put this on, helps me get into character as professor. But in improv, I was just talking to them. We were looking at Nobody Else But Me, great standard Jerome Kern song that I've done a video on. And I was getting into the diminished chords that the song contains and talking to them about functional diminished, how diminished actually occur in standard tunes, especially like Tin Pan Alley, Great American Songbook tunes. And I figured I would do this video because it's kind of fresh in my mind. And you know, I did a video on diminished harmony, gosh, back probably like almost 2 years ago at this point, year and a half. And it was sort of one of my, I do these videos where I describe my own personal journey and how the idea of diminished came to me in my life, and half-whole diminished scale and all that. And I was thinking, you know, I should do something a little more specific and a little more targeted towards, you know, what happens when you're playing a standard tune and you see that diminished chord. And I know for me, at first, what would happen is, first I would panic. Second, I would kind of just arpeggiate it. There's nothing wrong with that, just playing a diminished seventh arpeggio, all minor thirds. And then at some point I learned that I could play some patterns from the half-whole diminished scale, and you know, Joe Pass has some. You know, there was all kind of cool patterns you could play in the half-whole diminished scale. But I guess in the last, really, you know, it's been a long time, last 10, 15 years, I was really searching for a way to not have to change my approach just because a diminished chord happens, to try to like integrate those diminished sounds into the kinds of melodies that I'm trying to hear when I play sort of regular functional chord changes. And I thought that Nobody Else But Me is a really good example. It has pretty much, it has a couple, well, it's at least three diminished chords. I mean, you know, sometimes these tunes have different changes on different versions, but it's kind of a good way to talk about how diminished occur in standard tunes. So it's from the end of, if you do Nobody Else But Me in C, and I guess I'm kind of coming from the Peter Bernstein version on Signs of Life with Christian McBride and Greg Hutchinson and Brad Meldau. And so the last part of the tune where you have but you know, C major, C sharp diminished, D minor, D sharp diminished or E flat diminished, then back to D minor. So that first one, okay, if you're on a C and you go to C sharp diminished and it takes you to D minor, I think of that C sharp diminished as 5 of D minor. And in a certain sense, it's like an A7 flat 9 with a third in the bass with C sharp, because you got C sharp's the third of A7, G is the flat 7, B flat's the flat 9, and E is the fifth. So a lot of the time I'll just play the same stuff I would play as if the chords were, say, like E minor, A7 to D minor. It's just that C sharp diminished is filling in for the E minor to A7. So again, functional diminished. What is it functioning as? Diminished have a dominant function. So that one kind of behaves nicely. 5-1 that goes to 1. So, and a lot of the time I'll just play, when I see that diminished, I'll play like an A triad or an A7. And I tell my students, you know, for whatever reason, a first inversion major triad works really well in jazz improvisation. So that kind of thing. Okay, so that one behaves really well. 1, sharp 1 to 2. 1, 5 of 2. Done. So when that happens, you're set. What about the E flat diminished or D sharp diminished that goes to D minor? Well, you would think, okay, C sharp diminished going to D minor. If it were a D sharp diminished going to E minor, we'd have a similar situation. It would be 5 of the chord that it's going to, and we'd be in pretty good shape. We could just play D sharp diminished, okay, it's B7 going to E minor, but it's B7 flat 9 with a third in the bass, but it goes back to the 2 chord. So, yeah, I mean, to me, I just think of that as like a deceptive. It still is 5 of 3. It just doesn't go there. And that happens a ton in jazz tunes where you have a flat 3 diminished going to 2 all over the place. And so I play, over it like a B7 flat 9, but I make it go to 2 through sheer force of will, y'all. I close my eyes and I'm like, make it go to 2. So that whole sequence of chords. That's the same thing that kind of happens at the beginning of Stella by Starlight, right? Where you have kind of a 1 diminished going to 2, B flat diminished if you're in B flat, right? It's the same as D flat diminished to C minor, right? And I'm assuming a little bit that, whoever's watching this has a little bit of knowledge of how diminished chords work, how there's only 3 of them because they're made up of minor thirds and math. C sharp diminished is the same as E diminished, is the same as G diminished, is the same as B flat diminished, literally the notes are the same. But yeah, that chord progression happens all the time. I mean, how many tunes do you have where you have like 1, flat 3 diminished, 2, 5. You have that flat 3 diminished that you think should go up to A minor, like if I'm in the key of F and I play A flat diminished, you want it to go to A minor, put it. A lot of the time it goes to G minor instead. So I just treat it like... and if you want to get I treat it like it's going to 3 and I just make it go to 2 through, magic. Sorry, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, if you want to get a, jazz school chord scale on it, I find that often, for me, rather than the half-whole diminished scale, which is cool, and I love my, a slick half-whole diminished pattern is really nice, but I kind of find like in these 2 instances that harmonic minor my ear tells me that that's kind of a more appropriate, I don't know, that's the melodies I hear are more contained within that scale. Those are kind of the notes I'm hearing rather than... I mean, it's cool too. I mean, that's a sound. I guess maybe just like on that C sharp diminished, F sharp. I don't know if I'm hearing F sharp. And on the E flat diminished, am I hearing a G sharp? Which, the relevant half-whole diminished scale will give me that sound. Sometimes I am, y'all, and sometimes I want to go for that sound, but... functionally, I'm thinking like, okay, that's 5 of D minor, and so I can play, as if it were an A7 flat 9 going to D minor, kind of obvious choice would be D harmonic minor. And likewise, E flat diminished, I'm thinking, okay, well it's 5 of E minor, even though it doesn't go to E minor, so I can play E harmonic minor. So those are pretty, that happens in a lot of tunes. That's kind of the beginning of it could happen to you, right? Except... it could happen to you goes where it's supposed to go, right? It goes to the E minor if you were playing it in C. Or does it go to E minor or does it go to C major over E? Which leads us to a thing we'll talk about in a second. Hey y'all, forgive the interruption to regularly scheduled programming. But basically I did this video and I was on the treadmill the other day trying to keep my sanity. And I started thinking about harmonic major, and later on in the video, as you'll see, I talk about uses of a harmonic major scale on functional diminished chords. And realized that maybe I'd given a little bit of short shrift to the harmonic major, and I think that's because when I was coming up, I kind of I kind of skipped harmonic major modes and all the implications of that harmony. And Dan Hurley's book, The Jazz Language, didn't, if I remember correctly, didn't delve into harmonic major modes with a lot of detail. But anyway, I was thinking about, Corcovado. I was on the treadmill, and I was like, hey, I talk about, in a little bit you'll see, I talk about how the second chord on Corcovado, like you got A minor 6 to A flat diminished to G minor. So it's kind of that flat 3 diminished. But, A harmonic minor is one option there on that chord. And just make it go to G minor. And when I say harmonic minor, it's like the operative thing is still, I'm thinking that it's 5 of 3, so I'm thinking of like an E7. And if it's A harmonic minor, that would mean that it has an A natural in it. But if you used C harmonic major, sort of the relative major of harmonic minor, that's actually a really good option too, because it also gives you a G natural. It still gives you the E triad, but you also have a G triad. And so really, to add to our, sort of the way I've set this video up, and that, when you see that diminished chord in the song, you can either panic, arpeggiate the diminished, play like a fancy half-whole diminished pattern, or think of it, try to integrate it into your playing in a more functional way. I think your other options are both the harmonic minor and harmonic major, because both of those scales actually contain the diminished chord. So like for instance, if I'm thinking of Corcovado, the difference is really like, okay, harmonic minor, I've got the A flat, I've got an A natural, I've got B, C, D, E, F, G sharp A, right? Whereas C harmonic major, I've got a lot of those same notes. I'll also do it in this octave. I've got A flat, B, C, D, E, F, G sharp. So instead of G sharp and A, I have G sharp and G. Whereas half-whole diminished, I have some of those same notes as well. But that's an 8-note scale, octatonic scale. So I have A flat, I have B flat, B natural, C sharp, D, E, F, G, A flat, B flat, B, and so on. So you kind of have to choose in your own way. And I talk a lot about I'm looking for the perfect notes and playing the melodies that I hear. But to a certain extent, what I hear is kind of conditioned on what I've heard. You know what I mean? So the harmonic minor way of thinking about it kind of helps me get into the right place. But a lot of the time I'm not playing a 7-note scale anyway. I'm thinking of more of the harmony. So I'm thinking of that this chord is kind of an E7. But then do I want a G natural on top of that, or an A natural, or do I want any of those notes? It's not that really. Well, anyway, it's one way to think about it. So don't forget about harmonic major. Same thing in like your rhythm changes. When you have that 4 sharp 4 diminished going back to like 1 6 4. Yeah, you can think of that E diminished as being, 5 of 3, like I was saying, and kind of thinking of like an A7 with E in the bass going back to D minor. But you could also think, you don't really have a lot of time, but if you're thinking about a harmonic minor scale, D harmonic minor, you could think F harmonic major, and that gives you kind of a nice selection of notes, right? Because you get a C natural, and you also have like a C triad in there, an A triad and a C triad. So anyway, something to think about.